Imogen, that was just fantastic. I have to ask, the public response that you've been getting to the findings of your work, did you expect that? Did you set out to secure that?
In all honesty, no. I'm a scientist, so I spend a lot of my time in the lab. And after I had the research looking at cosmetics and the microbeads, and the first news piece we had from it, someone came into my office and they said, "Imogen, you're in the news," and I couldn't believe it. But the best thing about it all is it's created so much discussion because you don't expect there to be plastic in your facial scrubs. You don't expect there to be plastic from your clothes. When I think of plastic, I expect it to be a really hard material, like a bottle, not my soft dress. So it showed people that we really need to rethink this game.
Yeah. Alex, when something like this gets into the news, and as a correspondent of over 30 years, you have been documenting some of the toughest situations that the world has seen. But you've spent some time recently on the Nile and bringing attention and awareness to this plastics crisis. How does that change public perception?
Well, I mean, that is the aim, to actually change public perception. I spend most of my time in hostile environments. I've just come back from Syria. A few weeks before that, I was in South Sudan documenting child soldiers. And I was brought up in Africa. So from my earliest memories, I watched women usually carrying water in plastic bags or plastic drums. I saw the reliance on plastic, and I also saw in all the developing countries that I lived and I worked in, the aftermath of all of that plastic and the mountains that were everywhere. In South Sudan, when we went there, we saw cattle eating plastic, literally eating it, because there was no grass anywhere left that was uncovered by plastic. But I also saw thousands of refugees reliant on plastic for their shelter, to protect them from the sun, to give them some sort of covering. And sometimes these refugees or these displaced people are in those plastic homes for years. Some of them had been in this particular camp there for 5 years. So it seemed to me that there needed to be some sort of way through this. Plastic is very cheap, it's very convenient, but it's also killing, drowning the rivers. Imogen mentioned oceans, but I focused on the Nile because it's one of the most polluted rivers and basically a tributary to the Mediterranean. And I thought, if all this plastic is ending up in the Mediterranean, what on earth is happening along the way? And so we traveled through 5 different countries, and some of these African countries have taken enormous steps with some of the most draconian sentences if you're using plastic. In Kenya, you can be sent to jail for 4 years if you have a plastic bag. So they've really tried to make an impact. But what we found is that it's led to a huge black market, and it's just choking rivers like the Nile, literally choking. And when you think that hundreds of millions of people, just people, never mind the livestock and the fish, are reliant on that source, it seemed to me that we have to think of something. We have to, and my role as a journalist is to highlight what is happening. Maybe not come up with the solutions, but certainly show people, look how bad it is.
We're going to get to solutions in a minute, but I think you have a little clip to share with us. Is that right?
Yeah, we're working on a documentary, and this is just a tiny little tease of what's to come.
All right, let's roll that.
This is the majestic Nile, the world's longest river, crucial to the survival of millions of people.
The Nile is basically a life source for them.
But now the river's future is under threat like never before.
Everywhere you walk, it's all plastic.
we follow the trail of pollution from its source. And for the first time reveal the full extent of plastic pollution across 5 countries.
Wow. Tough indeed. Fred, we believe there are solutions,
coming after the
right?
disaster.
Yes. We believe there are solutions out there.
Can I just say, first of all, how humbled I am to be in the Explorers Festival of Nat Geo, because this is an incredible event. I think everyone agrees in the audience. I just want to congratulate you. Yes. It's amazing. I can't believe I'm on the same program as Paul, Rose, Dominic, all the others. So, and secondly, how delighted we are at Sky to be working with all of you at Nat Geo. It's been an amazing year. We launched it in April last year in Rome. It's been a great discovery, and I think Imogen, Alex and I were saying Imogen should be the next Prime Minister, but we were and she's one of our scholars, so we're very happy. So yes, it's a big issue for us. We've been extremely involved with sustainable issues over the last years. We were very big on becoming carbon neutral as a media company. We've been involved in deforestation, and suddenly we decided, especially with Sky News at the outset, to highlight something which was very relevant directly to citizens, and in a way where we could really put it on the roadmap of policymakers, of consumers. So we did that for 2 years on Sky News on an ongoing basis. And what we found is that there was a desire to find solutions, but there was always a question mark over how do you change your habits? How do you really integrate the ideas of alternatives in your daily life? How do you get other players to want to change their supply chain, the way they curate their products? And so we decided to do Sky Ocean Rescue, and we also decided to invest in solutions. And that came first of all from putting our own house in order. Mm-hmm. I do believe that if you want to be a credible player, you also have to show that you can do it yourself. So we will be SUP, single-use plastic free, by 2020, which meant that we completely redesigned our supply chain until China and all our suppliers. There's a ripple effect once you put it in place, and we've been sharing those processes. And we've also decided, our CEO decided to walk the talk, as he calls it, but also to create something where we could really put the impact of being a media player at the disposal of innovators. And that meant basically not just invest in solutions, but also help them grow and get adopted, which I think is the big thing. There's a lot of solutions out there. There's a lot of people with ideas, which is why we're partnering. Yeah. I think we want to find them in any community possible, in any affected area possible, in any a university lab, but also after, we also want to provide them with an ecosystem so that they can flourish and hopefully get trialed, tested, because alternatives to plastic are not easy to get adopted. So we've decided to invest in 3 areas, which are alternative to plastics, responsible consumption, and circular economy. And in all those areas, we're basically trying to give a chance to what we call the 1 billion ideas. We only go for ideas which we think will really have an impact on the environment, mm-hmm. and also where we can play a role in helping them.
Yeah. I want to go back to something, Alex, that you brought up, and Imogen, I'd be really curious in your perspective as well. There are uses of plastics for which people really have no choice. Mm. And how do you reconcile messages that we send that we need to reduce, get rid of single-use plastics, making blanket statements that really not everyone is in a position to help execute? Is there something that every single person can do?
Well, I'd say that plastic's actually a fantastic material, and that's why we've made so much of it. You're all sat there wearing your plastic clothes, on the plastic carpets, on the plastic chairs, watching a plastic screen. It really is everywhere, and it's only been made in the last 100 years, but it's a victim of its own success. Do we need to have our avocados wrapped in plastic when they have a protective layer anyway? Do we need our bananas wrapped in plastic? So it's keeping key main uses, which are, for example, trying to change climate change by minimizing weights of planes and cars. But we don't need it in so many single-use applications. But it's government and industry giving us those choices so we can make those choices ourselves. For the average Joe family, if you see some tomatoes that are £1 but wrapped in plastic, and the tomatoes that aren't wrapped in a plastic and they're £2, most people are going to go for the cheaper tomatoes because that's life. So we need choices.
Yeah. What have you seen in the work that in the reporting that you've done, Alex? Right? Are people even able to consider a different material?
That is an excellent point. They're not most of the time. I mean, if you're poor and you don't have any access to water and you have to walk miles to get it, I mean, I have people begging me for my plastic bottle that we're just throwing away every day because that's the only way that they can carry and sustain water, which might help them to survive that day. So it's not within their gift to decide. It's got to be much more multi-layered, and it's got to be intergovernmental, because a single nation can't do it on their own, but a number of different nations, because as I said, the black market is thriving in Kenya, and the bags are being transported or made in Kenya, going out to Uganda, and then being brought back in to Kenya. That's just one example. And there's a markup each time because people are poor and people need to make money, and it's done on a small level from a few boys in a market stall to a big network across different countries. And we uncovered this big network from Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya. So it cannot be done a single nation. It needs to be multi-layered, and there are definitely alternatives. If you're only given one alternative, which is the plastic sheeting, and that's going to keep you and your family alive, obviously you're going to take it. That decision has got to be made at a much higher level, and individuals who are rich and privileged, like everyone in this room, have to put the pressure on those governments, our governments, to do something about it, so that there are alternatives and people can still survive, but with those alternatives.
That's right. The alternatives, Fred, are some of the solutions that I think the Innovation Challenge grants are seeking to bring forward. Have you thought about what some of those things could be?
So we have started to see emerging some trends in terms of, I was watching Imogen, for example, we just invested in a cellulose-based microbead. Which is quite high-risk innovation, but it's a great way to solve this. There are packaging you can make out of wood, for example, wood waste. We have just invested in a group of researchers that are using shellfish waste in order to create new material. So there are solutions out there, and they can also be very pragmatic. In the Innovation Challenge we launched yesterday, we're looking for very pragmatic solution on very ubiquitous issues like the containers, the beverage containers, anything that can encourage reuse and recycling. Sometimes those solutions will also come from regions where there is scarcity, and actually innovation sometimes comes from the places where there is most need, and I really believe that that's the case with those challenges. That's why it's great that it's a global challenge, so we can go and source it in Asia, East Asia, South America. I think that's the beauty of trying to, even if it's, some people are saying we're not putting enough money in those innovation challenges, but there is a lot of money putting in there. I think it's more the ideas that we want to find, and then we can accelerate them. I think it's, just to the point of how you change things, governments definitely can lead. I think there's also a need for the industries to really now walk the talk in terms of not putting targets which are in 25 years, I was very pleased to see Ben & Jerry's, for example, announce that we're going to be single-use plastic-free by 2020, and I quickly shared our guide of how we got there with them. And it's the way it should be done, in a way. And this can really accelerate. And I think the other piece is changing everyday life and helping consumer and give them some tools. We have a campaign called Pass on Plastic, where there's 6 things we give to consumers that you can do on your everyday habits. But also, in stadiums, at football events, in school, providing the kit to, there's a lot of ways that you can build an ecosystem of change.
Great.
Emma,
Well,
can I
yes.
just say just one thing about the one thing that we discovered was that there's very little research on this in Africa. And what it needs is some scientists like Imogen
Yes.
to go out there. I mean, there's only one scientist who's done any research on microplastics in freshwater environments. And he did it 10 years ago or something.
And no one knew.
And no one knew about it. It was very small, it was very anecdotal. When we went diving in Lake Victoria, you can see the plastic on the top, but what you can't see underneath is the tons of plastic that are on the bed. It's literally a plastic island under the water. That's what we can't see. And all the local fishermen are talking about the fish getting smaller and fewer fish and bringing in their catches in it full of plastic. And if all those people are talking about it there, further down the line, it's worse and worse and worse and worse until it finally ends up in the Mediterranean.
Yes, I
and
know.
I think the message is
Yes.
that you think it's happening far away. It's not. It's happening, and it's going to affect us all.
That's right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Obviously, there's so much that we can talk about. Imogen, Fred, Alex, thank you so much for all the work that you are doing to bring awareness, to find solutions, and to catalyze things that get to market. We really appreciate it. Thank you.